we birthed a new nation called Kenya.
Mm.
Celebrate every moment. Jamhuri Day, Independence Day. Jamhuri Day is the Independence Day. You see, there are some holidays. There are some holidays that come in December. I never understand which one it is.
Jamhuri Day.
There's a Jamhuri Day.
Just Jamhuri for independence specifically.
There was another Jamhuri Day. There's Moi Day.
Mashujaa Day. Where we celebrate heroes who fought.
Heroes.
Who fought
we
for
celebrate heroes. And
so Mashujaa is usually on October 20th. So they fought. Then we got independence in December, which is the 12th every year. When Kenya became a republic.
That moment, I'm always off this. I'm trying to meet my end year deadlines, so I never get to connect with this holiday. But it's almost over 50 years since we got independence.
I think 60.
It's 60.
It's because 60.
Yeah, I think
this year should be the 60th year.
Yeah, I think we'll be talking about 60 when our politicians get their chance to yell at us. But do you really think, counting on what we read through history, we never lived through that moment. Yeah, but reflecting on what we read through history and what we can observe as new historians, we are building the history for the next generation. Do you really think Kenya fell after independence? Considering drawing reflections from what you've watched about, what you've read about South Africa, and maybe the kind of neighborhoods that you've seen about South Africa, and other maybe comments of other people on what they have seen when they go to South Africa and what they see on the other side of the continent, especially on the aspect of we begin with the aspect of planned neighborhoods, developed urban planning. You don't think we fell after? Do you really think we got it after independence, or we fell in terms of planned neighborhoods?
I don't really think there is much of a difference of what the colonialists did in the country. We became more reserved, I would say so, and it tended to lie on a single side where, if for instance now we have neighborhoods, rich neighborhoods like Muthaiga, if you've been there, Runda, you look at the planning there and the housing there, I think it's more of the same as what the so-called governors of the white men lived when they were running the country. They used to call them governors, if you are aware. Like the Queen installed a governor who had commanders, I don't know, superintendents, and so on and so forth. If you read the history a bit, so some of these people and the bigwigs who ruled the country through the Queen lived in these neighborhoods in the same kind of structure. So there's never been change in the planning of infrastructure in Kenya after independence. I think it was more of, there was already a class that was close to those who were pushing for independence, the Kenyatta and his lot. So it was more like redistribution of the same class to move in quickly to those places that the colonialists settled in. We talk of the farms, we talk of the ranches, that is now agriculture generally, and it has never changed. The mode of agriculture, because if you look at some of the agricultural practices that are really doing well in Kenya, Kakuzi, for instance, it's really a big agricultural company. It accounts for a bigger percentage of agricultural items being exported or consumed outside the country. And looking at the normal agriculture setup in Kenya, and it's a discussion, you find that not many of the regular farmers, the input is felt. But then those ranches and farms that were run by the colonialists, it seems that there was more like a replacement. They left, but then it's like they still have a hand in it.
We had new lords in town.
Exactly. So you look at like a farm like a Kuzi farm in Muranga, I think it owns like around 10,000, 100,000 acres of farmland. It's still controlled by some British nationals. Then you look at Kiambu, the plantations there, certain companies, which I don't want to mention their name. So I do believe that after independence, Kenya, I think
we more remained the same.
We more remained the same. There was a reservation.
Okay, for instance, I've gotten an opportunity to watch at some episode of Kwame Nkrumah's kids having to move to Kenya after he was overthrown, and being housed by the Kenyattas. Was it Kenyattas? Yeah, Kenyattas.
The Ghanaian Kwame.
Yeah, the Ghanaian Kwame. When he was overthrown, his family mysteriously ended up in Kenya.
But why Kenya?
They happened to be allies.
Kenyatta so they skipped Nigeria.
They ran all the way to Kenya. Yeah, okay. From what I drew from that video, from that recording, one of his sons was being interviewed. Still stays here, in Nairobi, around the United Nations Crescent. You know that place? Yeah. So he recounts how his father, the property they were given, his father took some time before he would be released to come and join them here. How his father, how his family was allocated a property along that route, by Kenyatta himself. So from this aspect, you draw one thing. You draw that what we call the posh neighborhoods today in Nairobi were purely planned by the colonizers. So we simply had new people being implanted in those settlements. Yeah. Okay, we could say they had the same mentality of the colonizers. Same people, same new people with the same mentality of the colonizers to preserve this property. Yeah. But it so happens that what was called the planned neighborhoods, the posh neighborhoods by then, are what are still posh neighborhoods. We never built any new posh neighborhoods.
So there's no new Runda. There's no new Mudhaiga. Just the same.
Yes, in fact, the places that we got a hold of, we ruined them to become slums once more. For instance, when you come to Eastlands, people think Eastlands didn't have an element of planning.
It did have.
There are places that already had a hand of the colonizers in development. For example, Huruma. Huruma has some planned, something like a gated estate community. But when they when the county council cut their maintenance ties with this neighborhood, you could see, if you go there today, you can see what happened. Like everybody built a party structure to house, to rent to an extra person, to host his dogs. If you go to Umoja, the first phase that was built by the county government of those days wasn't called the county, it was called the county council. What is the type of government that is there in the UK? You'll find that they even had greenery. Today, that place doesn't have greenery.
All trees were
cut down. So did we really behave like animals after we got everything?
Because you see, as I told you, there's a I hear, I don't know whether it's factual or it's confirmed. The area of Donong and slightly after Buruburu, the other side. The colonial, there was a certain specific guy who was doing kind of farming.
Ranch
farming, dairy and the poultry.
I've heard that narrative.
And so that's why there's a certain structure. If you're in the roundabout of Donong, it looks like a tank that is elevated high up, like a concrete tank.
I have seen people asking about it.
Many people ask about it. So I think it used to be the source of water for supplying the dairy, because the guy was basically for animal farming, specifically.
I've heard that story.
And now you look at that area, it doesn't look like a thing that there was a ranch there. It is crowded with every kind of structure. There's not even a specific planning of a structure.
Nobody ever thought, let's plan about. We have a new land. Let's plan about.
So I do think that maybe the colonizers left with their script of the planning. They didn't leave it behind.
So I've never seen anybody making an effort to get us new neighborhoods that are really accommodating. And everybody wants to say, I want to live in Mudhaiga. Maybe when they get a hand in Mudhaiga, they'll do the same destruction.
True.
So you must have the colonizers' mentality to maintain what they already did.
Exactly. And I think also the commitment to create new neighborhoods, it's, somebody just looks at it and says that, maybe they cannot do it alone, or they cannot just start.
It needs money.
I think it just needs the government's strength to declare that we want to build a Mudhaiga in the Rio. And get some
I think it needs government backing.
It needs government backing. Because as a private developer, it will be more like exclusively for certain reasons. And when a private developer gets somewhere, people are going to serve. There is not going to be compensation. At least if the government makes that effort and it backs it up, they can create compensation plans, maybe resettlement.
On that same aspect of legislation and the government influencing things to happen, on the aspect of political decision making, we used to have town halls, from what we read from history.
Before.
And even today, when I watch and read about things happening in Europe, you hear somebody mentioning a town hall decision. They are still there in remote places. They make unanimous decisions. how they want to run their activities. Yeah. But here in Kenya, have you ever had a moment where
there is none.
where people sit in a town hall and say, in this our neighborhood, we want all our roads to be tarmac.
Where everybody's opinions count.
Where everybody's opinion count. And this is how we are going to tarmac our roads. Everybody is going to contribute 20 shillings, or we will draw this money from this treasury. We'll go and get a loan to do it.
It never happens.
It never happens. We've never had
in fact, the only town hall engagement I had was when Raila was going to Jamhuri. Jamhuri wanted to talk to people to hear their opinion on things that matters to him.
Whether to get into a broad-based government.
Yeah. And then after that, he went and did his own stuff.
We say a town hall decision, but it's never unanimous. It's
pre-planned. They call them social halls.
Yeah, social
halls. They still exist, but now the agenda of these halls is different. It's not more about community, about what the community wants. You know, politicians are using these social halls for their own agenda. They can drive you there to ask votes from you, but not to listen to what he or she wants to do for you as a community.
Historically, when you read about the history of the US, on the formation of the Confederate state, it first became a confederate, then it later became a convergence of several states. You hear how those men, you reflect on how those men sat. Even the house where they sat, the rusty house where they sat to form that constitution, is still there. It's preserved historically. You realize town halls and social halls were a force to do within those communities. Then we want to talk about, we live here, we want to go and join their communities and enjoy what they had already created. We never sacrifice to try and give, to try and create better things for us. So I think on that aspect we really fail. Like we really we failed to take into consideration our needs and what we aspired.
Do you think it's also about the visionaries also after independence? Because I believe the immediate people who are to give us that kind of motivation, or the immediate people who experienced the colonialist living, you know, the likes of Tom Mboya, before he was murdered. He wasn't murdered before independence. After. But then I believe it was a visionary.
1970.
I believe he had a plan for Kenya. And there are specific visionaries that I think would have brought us forward. But due to the selfishness of certain leaders or certain specific people, I think, you know, through assassinations, some of these visionaries, some of these visionaries never managed to at least give us the Kenya that they had in their mind after independence. Because I believe there were certain ways they were looking at it after we get independence, that we need to go this way. Even the constitution that we run with now, I believe a lot of elements are borrowed from the British way of doing things.
You look at even our education system. We still glorify schools that were purely British. Like people went to Alliance. Even Alliance had a very big influence of how people were expected to behave. Even Starre.
And we still glorify it.
We still glorify this. I think these schools are a reincarnation of our colonial system. And
because remember there was a time when national schools were only 5, and there were only 5. It was Alliance,
Lenana, the Nairobi school.
It was Alliance, Lenana, Nairobi school,
Maseno,
Mangu. And Mangu. And these schools, I believe, they were built at the time when the colonialists were here, if I'm not wrong. And their value of education and how they used to be conducted, they created that kind of class that if you cannot really do well where you live, in the village where you are, you cannot come here.
You couldn't get
it. You cannot. But now we have like over 100, 200 national schools. I believe that there's a small change there. It was more like a promotion. You find a national school, say, in the village, but the structure is the same as what it should be. The only thing elevated there is the status. That it is a national
They are not providing the same quality.
The same quality. Because now, if I see it now and I see a good school, I will only still think of Alliance today. Many years after independence, I can still think of Alliance.
But the problem is allocation of resources.
Because I believe,
most of the money is channeled. Maybe they want to build a church. They want to build a chapel. They want to build an auditorium, an amphitheater.
So
channeling too much of resources to one particular place.
So there's not that decentralization of funding, or more like equal. You know, they're using it like, you know, the 1 man 1 shilling kind of approach. So they believe that a school in Nairobi should receive more funds than that in Shah.
Because more people stay around.
Because more people stay around.
And finally, people who study in Nairobi and cannot make it to those schools are sent way down. They have to be sent way down up country to at least get an education.
Exactly. So I think the colonialists left. They gave us more like a jump start. Of at least they gave us like a blueprint of how we should conduct ourselves in terms of planning, infrastructure, and way of living. I think the best thing the government would have done would have been to you know, sit down and say, now, okay, they left like structures like these ones in town, and in other, because I believe the areas that really enjoyed the white privilege during colonization was the Nairobi Kiambu area. Certain areas like Northeastern and Nyanza didn't really have certain ways and structures and planning that reflected on the colonizers. Because if you land like in maybe Siaya County, for instance, you will not even get a thing.
You won't see a colonial establishment.
You will never even get a thing that shows
empty land.
It's just empty land. They were least favorable for them. So I think because the government ran from within Nairobi Kiambu area, I think they would have replicated whatever was left to the whole country. Yes. That is, if the government was ambitious about making Kenya, a top country, as they wished.
I think it's just the issue of best interest. These guys didn't have the best interest. And on aspects of preservation of the whole colonial establishment, do you believe we preserve the whole, for example, how we do things, which side of the road we drive? We never had a chance to review.
Yeah, we never had because there was no time. Creativity was limited. People were running and grabbing what we made. but I do feel for Kenya specifically, I think we are not paying allegiance to our colonizers. I think there is a drift. We tend to look at the United States more than we look at the British kind of living.
The United States.
Because you look at countries in West Africa, they still speak French, and there's still a big French impact there, of which certain countries are trying to resist from that. A country like Burkina Faso and Traore, they realize, they realize that their colonizers are still really having a really big impact in them, and for them, they feel that is not in their best interest. But now for Kenya as a country, I do believe that we are really more of rebels than collaborators.
We are creating our new churches.
Yeah. Because if you look at our way of living, we tend to be more inclined on the American kind of, because even right now you ask any random Kenyan, country where they want to go to or working, they want to go to America. But if you ask a citizen of Guinea, they have a lot of things in France. They want to go to France. They still want to go to France. Even their own leaders, funny enough, their own leaders have properties in France. But it's so rare. In Kenya, there are some politicians of the old families who still have properties in the UK, but many of them are diversifying. They are going to other countries instead.
Like the US. The US is a home for everybody.
For everyone. But I think we are all geared towards that direction the most.
Okay, and then what remained of the assets that were left by these colonizers? Most of them ended up in the hands of singular families. Or an establishment that still defines them. For example, a business. Okay. For example, when we look at our famous coffee farms and tea, you'll find if it's still not in the hands of the whites, it's in the hands of some African somebody, an image that was seen during independence. Maybe your grandfather was a chief. He was a senior chief. He was he worked as a secretary in the office of the Nairobi governor by then.
I think that class still continues. It still continues to rule, because if you look at somebody like this MP for Makadara, it's called Alado. You know Alado?
Yes.
I think it's called George Alado or something.
Yes.
Or Geoffrey Majiwa. You've heard those two names.
Yes.
I think these guys, they were mayors when Nairobi was a county council set up.
Exactly.
And they transformed and became their MPs.
Even our friend Gumo remained an MP, and he was an MP.
So you feel like there's no change, and we also, as Kenyans, I think we believe that the best people can really take these positions and those who trickle down from that colonial system. Because they come with the narrative.
Even if you look at Senior Chief Koinange, their families played an influence after independence. Exactly. And even right now, when their names are diminishing, they are still there.
They're still there.
They still work in the back end.
Exactly. Because they said as the narrative of we were there, we know, we come from this. They kind of create a trail of path there, and also still it is to their own advantage, because you see somebody like that guy, the George Alado guy. He was a mayor by then. The guy is like, I don't know, 60 or 50 something years right now.
But he still controls the city.
He still controls the city. But I believe after that generation is gone, then even when the colonizers come back, I think maybe after 100 years, they will find that whatever they left has only 2% influence. Because I believe there will be Rundas in the Ruiru. The Runda is slowly,
I really don't think.
Runda is slowly losing. Because there's a certain, have you noticed?
I really don't think there will be. Because for you to get a place like Runda, there's a regulated property development. For instance, if I hold the plot next to you, you should not create an apartment while I just have a mansion. Yeah. So
there's places.
The aspect of legislation already beat us hands down on that. We don't have strong legislation to protect us from rogue developers. Yeah. So basically, it's like since independent, we fell on some aspects. Okay, and then we never improved.
Yeah.
Some depreciated in quality, some never improved. Yeah. So we did we really make a progress? No. Is there anything that is remarkable that you can say we did by us in terms of aspects of civilization of a community? Civilization, that is how we live, how we go to school, how we create our neighborhoods and social development. That means we never gained anything after independence.
But still we owe the colonialists a jump start of how things are run, because we would have been clueless.
I heard somebody say one thing, that the colonialists just left because it was their time to leave. Otherwise, fighting a colonialist with a rungu and the rifles.
So you say it's because they decided
it's time. I really do believe it was time. It was getting expensive to run these colonies. But I also feel they were a little bit fair, accountable with what they collected. For example, their construction of the railway. The railway is still there. You can still see the infrastructure over 60 years since they
not
left.
Much of a change.
It's like the engineers of that moment come from space.
So you believe that, okay, talking of colonization, there are certain countries that were never colonized in Africa. I know you know.
Yeah, I know. One, Ethiopia
and which one? Sierra Leone, Liberia.
Yeah.
So looking at Liberia, for instance, the development of Nigeria economically, Liberia, and you look at Ethiopia, do you feel that every country that was colonized and those that are not colonized, there is more like they were not given a jump start, or maybe they never tested certain kind of infrastructure or development. So do you feel that these countries, Liberia for instance, of course we all know the economic status of Liberia is not as robust as
aggressive
as you might think. So do you think the colonialists also had a hand, if you are colonized or not colonized, there's a kind of a difference in how citizens and economic growth is going to happen?
Yeah, it has an influence. I think all this boils down to capital investment. The colonizers owned the capital that did the industry development, that created the communities. In fact, there are still real estate properties owned by the colonizers here in Kenya.
Today?
Yes. Yeah. If you go to Limuru, I think you can't miss. Maybe you find nowadays you find that it's less aggressive. They just own a space. They still own the coffee farms. Yeah, they're old, so they don't do much with the property, but it's there. Yeah.
So there's still influence.
There's influence. So it's the aspect of influence, capital. So capital was the ultimate influence. Exactly.
So do you think our government still recognizes the influence and the presence of the little bit influence and presence of the colonizers right now? They recognize.
They do,
and it's something they cannot.
I see. Most of them, they sit with them. Yeah.
So we are still having elements of.
We are still colonized. Woe unto you.
Yeah.
We are still colonized.
Yeah. Sad fact.